Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me. They called me the dumb one. My sister got Harvard, the penthouse, and the Tesla. I got silence. On her graduation day, my father raised his glass in front of 200 people and said she'd inherit everything, $18 million worth of everything. I was sitting in the back, the kind of quiet that burns your throat, when a stranger in a charcoal suit slipped an envelope into my hand and whispered, "Now's the time to show them who you really are." In that moment, I realized my whole life had been their lie, and this piece of paper might finally prove it. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments so I know you're listening, or tell me where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If stories like this move you, hit subscribe. It costs nothing, but it means everything to know that someone out there still believes quiet people deserve to be heard. My name is Ethan Cole, and this is how the dumb one rewrote the legacy everyone tried to erase. The Fairmont Grand shimmered that night like it wanted to outshine everyone inside it. 200 guests, crystal chandeliers swaying above champagne laughter, and a string quartet playing something too perfect for the kind of ache sitting in my chest. My name, spelled wrong, of course, was printed on a place card at the farthest table from the stage. Ethan. I fixed my tie, exhaled once, and told myself to survive the night. Just smile. Just don't draw attention. That's what I'd been doing for 30 years. From my table by the service door, I watched my parents glide across the room like diplomats. Richard Cole, my father, wore the confidence of a man used to applause. Beside him, my mother Margaret adjusted the hem of her silk gown before greeting the mayor's wife. Lydia, my younger sister, stood beneath a chandelier, radiant and certain of her place at the center. Harvard Law had sculpted her posture into something untouchable. The photographers circled her like satellites. "Tonight," my father said into the microphone, his voice booming across the ballroom, "we celebrate the Cole family's greatest achievement." He paused just long enough for everyone to look toward Lydia. "My daughter, the only true legacy this family could ask for." The applause came in waves. I forced a smile holding my glass, though I hadn't tasted a drop. My mother stepped up next, holding a small velvet box. "For Lydia," she said, "the Tesla Model S Plaid, because brilliance deserves to move fast." Laughter, applause, flashbulbs. Then she reached into her clutch, the Hermes one that cost more than my car, and pulled out another envelope. And because success deserves a view, she added, "We're giving you the San Francisco penthouse." A nod to $8 million property flashed across the screen behind them. Marble floors, skyline views, a terrace big enough to land a small plane. I caught my reflection in a window-black suit, wrong tie, and the faintest curve of a smile that wasn't real. Beside the stage, the family lawyer, Gregory Hales, whispered something into my father's ear. Both glanced my way. I didn't need to hear the words to know their meaning. Time to make things official. My sister, glowing, took the microphone and looked straight at me. And of course, thank you to my brother Ethan for teaching finger painting to Boston's future Picassos. The room laughed politely. I didn't. I felt movement behind me, a shift in the air. A man in a charcoal suit stood at my shoulder. Older, calm, the kind of quiet that demands attention. He slipped an envelope into my hand, sealed in dark wax. "Your grandfather knew the truth," he whispered. "It's time they do too." Before I could respond, he disappeared into the crowd like smoke. "Ethan!" "My father," Richard called from the stage. "Come on up, son. Let's settle this quickly." I rose, hearing my chair scrape the floor. Heads turned. The photographer's flash caught my face just as I stepped toward the podium. The Parker duofold pen gleamed under the lights laid neatly beside the document waiting for my signature waiver of inheritance rights. For a moment, I stood there surrounded by 200 people, pretending not to stare. Lydia adjusted her dress. My mother Margaret smiled like it hurt. My father tapped the paper. "Go ahead, son. Let's keep this elegant." My fingers brushed the pen. The chandelier above trembled slightly. Or maybe it was me. The man's voice echoed in my head. "Don't sign." I looked down at the envelope, its wax seal catching the light heavy in my pocket like it was breathing. "Before I sign," I said into the microphone, my voice steady but low enough to make the room lean in, "I need 1 minute." My father frowned, the first crack in his perfect composure. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on, and somewhere in that silence, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The wind off the river smelled like rain and champagne when I stepped out onto the balcony. I pulled the envelope from my jacket, traced the seal with my thumb, and broke it open. Inside was a single folded letter and a USB drive engraved with the initials EC1117. My grandfather's initials, Edward Cole, the only man who'd ever said I wasn't broken. The letter was from someone named Thomas Gray. Cole trusted me with what he couldn't say while he was alive. "There's truth buried beneath the paper your parents made you sign. The file will explain. Don't sign anything tonight." I leaned against the railing, the city lights rippling on the water. Edward's voice came back to me like it never left. "Don't measure yourself in dollars, Ethan. Measure yourself in people. When they can't see you, it doesn't mean you're not there." For a moment, I was 16 again in Nantucket, sitting at the dinner table while Lydia announced her early admission to Harvard. Champagne popped. My father toasted to the future of the Cole name. My mother said softly, "Ethan should focus on something simple, something he can manage." I had smiled then, too. Smiled and said I liked art. They thought that meant I'd given up. But art gave me a language when words didn't fit. Years later in my Portland classroom, that language filled every inch of space. 23 kids raced toward me each morning, faces smudged with color eyes brighter than any skyline. One of them, Mateo, hadn't spoken for 2 years after losing his father. The first sentence he ever said came after painting a burst of violet across the paper. "Purple sounds happy," he told me. I'd gone home that day and cried in the car. They never knew about any of that. To my family, I was the failure who settled. They never saw the awards lining my desk drawer, the notes from parents saying I'd changed their children's lives. The measure of success in our house was money, not meaning. Back in the car, I plugged the USB into my laptop. 2 folders appeared, Clause 9 trigger and letters 10 years. My pulse quickened. I clicked the second. Dozens of scanned envelopes filled the screen, each addressed to me, each stamped "Return to Sender." 10 years' worth of letters my grandfather had written. Every one of them sent back unopened. I stared at the dates. Every time my parents moved or hired a new house assistant, the same notation appeared: "Refused at residence." The handwriting in the refusal looked familiar. My mother's. My chest tightened. All those years he'd tried to reach me and they'd made sure he couldn't. Every birthday card, every letter I thought he'd forgotten to send, they'd intercepted them all. I took a screenshot, then locked the USB. My reflection in the laptop screen looked older than I remembered harder. For the first time, I understood what Thomas Gray meant. There's truth buried beneath the paper they made you sign. The phone in my pocket vibrated. Unknown number. Ethan Cole. A calm male voice, low and deliberate. "This is Thomas Gray. Don't sign anything tonight. Bring that envelope back into the ballroom when I call your name." I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the car window, the same face my parents never really saw, and whispered to it, "Let's see what you left me, Grandpa." Then I straightened my jacket, turned toward the glowing ballroom, and walked back inside. The morning before the gala, the world smelled of acrylic paint and cheap coffee instead of perfume and champagne. Sunlight slid through the cracked blinds of my classroom, washing over paper butterflies taped to the wall. I was surrounded by the noise of brushes clinking against jars, kids laughing, and the faint hum of the old radiator that refused to die. This was my world, chaotic, bright, alive. I stood in front of a group of parents and administrators, holding a worn-out binder filled with numbers that had cost me 10 years of sleep. 520 children across 3 districts. I said, my voice steady. 16 who regained speech through color association. 5 who made it back from the edge because of this program. 7 National Education Awards. 3 Teacher of the Year recognitions. Every bit of it documented, verified, and funded mostly from my paycheck. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. Art Reach is proof that art saves lives. Dr. Patel, a neurologist from the Children's Hospital, nodded slowly. It's unconventional, but the data speaks for itself. Then Mrs. Chen, mother of my quietest student, stood up. Her hands trembled as she clutched her son's sketchbook. My boy didn't speak for 2 years after the accident, she said, tears already in her eyes. Last week he looked at me and said, "Purple sounds like happiness." The room went still. For a second, no one breathed. Then applause filled the space. Not polite applause, but the kind that comes from relief. After the meeting, I carried the binder back to my desk and began organizing every certificate, photo, and testimonial into a new briefcase. On the front, I stuck a white label, verified proof. I snapped the locks shut and sealed it with a strip of red tape. These weren't stories, they were facts, numbers, signatures, timestamps. Proof that my worth wasn't just something sentimental. When the last parent left, I lingered by the window. Snow drifted in light flakes outside, coating the parking lot in a thin film of quiet. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single message glowed on the screen. "They'll make you sign tomorrow night. Don't go unprepared." Attached was a link to an internal family email chain, an invitation to the Fairmont Grand event. I was never copied on. My name wasn't listed anywhere yet. Somehow the seating chart still had me as guest of family. I scrolled until I reached the bottom of the message sent by Gregory Hales, forwarded by my father. My stomach sank. That night I met with the principal, Miss Reyes, and asked her to notarize every educational report under her seal. She looked at me carefully. "Ethan, are you in trouble?" I gave her the same half smile I'd been giving my family for years. "Not yet," I said. "But I think I'm about to be." She signed each page anyway. Later, at the small gallery downtown, our student showcase opened. The lights were dim, the music soft. Purple sounds. Happy hung in neat block letters across the entryway. My kids' artwork filled the wall. Sunsets, self-portraits, and stories painted in color instead of words. A local paper photographer walked around snapping shots, a guy with a camera too professional for this small space. He stopped beside me. "Ethan Cole, right?" he asked. "You did the district exhibit last year?" I nodded, half distracted. He smiled. "You probably don't remember me. I used to volunteer with you for the first Art Reach fundraiser, the one in the church basement." It hit me then, the same photographer my father had hired for the Fairmont Grand event. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "If you need clean footage tomorrow, something for the record, he'll be there. He'll keep the lens running." I stared at him, not sure whether to feel gratitude or dread. "Why would you do that?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because people like you usually don't have someone filming when the truth hits the fan." When I left the gallery that night, my phone buzzed again. A new message from the same unknown number. "Bring the briefcase. When they hand you the pen, he'll hand you the microphone." It was signed simply, "The snow had stopped." The city lights reflected off the river like streaks of lavender. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to calm. Purple still sounded like happiness, just not the kind my family would ever understand. By the time I returned to the Fairmont Grand, The ballroom was bathed in gold. The chandeliers glowed like they'd been fed on pride. My father stood center stage with Lydia and my mother Margaret at his side, radiating the kind of confidence only inherited money can buy. I was at the edge of the crowd, the verified proof briefcase in one hand and the opened envelope from my grandfather in the other. Inside my jacket pocket, the USB drive burned against my ribs. Tonight my father announced, "We honor the continuation of the Cole name. Lydia has proven herself capable, responsible, and worthy of every ounce of trust this family can offer." He paused just long enough to let the words hang heavy. My son Ethan, while talented in his chosen path, prefers simplicity over the burden of management. We're proud of him, too, in our own way. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it cut anyway. Gregory Hales approached the podium with rehearsed precision. "If we could just make this formal," he said, laying a folder on the table. "This is the waiver of inheritance rights. Once signed, all holdings will transfer cleanly to Miss Lydia Cole." He placed the Parker Duofold pen beside it like a knife waiting for a hand. I walked toward the stage, slowly feeling every stare. Lydia leaned toward the microphone, her voice honeyed and sharp. "Come on, Ethan. You don't really need this, do you? You've always said teaching is its own reward." I smiled, though my pulse was pounding in my ears. "You're right," I said quietly. "But rewards and rights aren't the same thing." I took the pen, bent over the paper, and with my other hand slipped the small USB into my pocket, pressing its side button twice. The DJ's laptop on the far end of the ballroom blinked blue, connecting by Bluetooth exactly as Thomas Gray had instructed. The music died. The microphones went silent. The lights flickered once, then dimmed. Every head turned toward the massive screen behind the stage. Static. Then an image resolved my grandfather, Edward Cole, seated at his mahogany desk. His voice calmed the date stamp reading 2015. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means the family has chosen ambition over integrity once again. Clause 9. Impact and humility will now be read in full." The room froze. My father's glass clattered against the podium. My mother's face drained of color. Clause 9. Edward continued. "The Cole inheritance shall pass to the descendant whose work demonstrates measurable benefit to others, not in wealth, but in human impact." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My sister's face stiffened into disbelief. My father turned to Gregory Hales. "Turn it off." Gregory fumbled with his tablet, but before he could, a voice echoed from the back of the room. "Don't bother," said a man stepping out from the shadows. "Thomas Gray alive and very much real. It's streaming from a secure server, Richard. You can't erase this one." Gasps rose around us. My father's jaw clenched. "You have no authority here." Thomas Gray climbed the steps with surprising steadiness for a man his age. "On the contrary," he said, pulling a document from his coat. "I'm the executive of Edward Cole's estate appointed by him and verified by Judge Elaine Porter, whose certification is right here." He held up a paper stamped and sealed in gold. "You filed a forged version of this will for 10 years. Tonight we correct that. This is slander." My mother snapped, her voice shaking. The screen flickered again. My grandfather's voice deepened. "If my son Richard attempts to remove Ethan publicly, the estate is to be frozen immediately pending investigation." The ballroom erupted in whispers. My father's hand went for the mic, but Thomas Gray spoke first, louder. "Before anyone signs anything, the legitimate will of Edward Cole will be read in full." I stood still, breathing in the sound of my family unraveling. For years they'd spoken over me, for me, about me. Now the silence they'd forced on me had turned into something powerful. It filled the room like oxygen after a long suffocation. My father looked at me, furious, afraid, and maybe for the first time uncertain. I met his eyes and didn't flinch. He'd wanted me quiet. Tonight, my silence was louder than his empire. Thomas Gray turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. You're about to witness the truth of Edward Cole's legacy." The lights dimmed again. My fingers tightened around the handle of the briefcase. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving the night. I was standing in the middle of it, ready for whatever came next. The ballroom was no longer golden. The chandeliers glowed cold, the light stripped of its warmth. Waiters froze mid-step, unsure if they should keep serving champagne or run. Thomas Gray stood before the audience, his voice carrying across the vast hall as he unrolled the original parchment of my grandfather's will. Clause 9. He read states that the estate of Edward Cole shall be transferred to the descendant who demonstrates measurable, independently verified benefit to society. The hum of conversations died instantly. I stepped forward, the briefcase heavy in my hand. When I placed it on the table beside Thomas Gray, the metallic click of the lock echoed through the hall like a gavel strike. Verified. Proof the label read in red ink. I flipped the latches and lifted the lid. Thomas Gray pulled the documents out one by one, reading as he went. Letters from parents, district evaluations, official commendations from the Department of Education. He turned to the next stack, peer-reviewed publications, Journal of Art Therapy, detailing methods developed by Mr. Ethan Cole, verified recognition from the Office of Public Engagement at the White House. He placed each document beneath the overhead projector, the images flashing across the screen behind us. My handwriting appeared on my classroom walls, the smiling faces of children holding up their paintings. The silence was so complete that even the sound of the projector fan seemed deafening. From the second row, a woman rose. "Mrs. Chen." Her voice trembled but did not falter. "That's my son," she said, pointing at the photo of a boy with a splash of purple across his canvas. "He didn't speak for years. Mr. Cole helped him find words again. He said purple sounds happy. The words hit the room like a soft hammer, reshaping the air." My sister's voice cut through, next sharp and forced. "That's just volunteer work. Everyone volunteers. You can't measure that." Her smile wavered as Thomas Gray turned to a second folder. "This," he said, "is Lydia Cole's contribution." He paused as if it pained him to read it. 40 hours of mandatory volunteer service and an accounting discrepancy, $15,000 withheld from a youth relief fund. Her own signature confirms it. The crowd stirred. Whispers began to spiral outward. A journalist in the back lifted his camera, the flash slicing through the heavy air. My father's voice thundered in protest. "This is irrelevant. This is a graduation party, not a courtroom." Before Thomas could respond, another voice rang out, steady, female, commanding. "It is both." Judge Elaine Porter rose from her seat. "And as a sitting judge, I can confirm the validity of this document and its legal precedence over any revised version." She gestured toward the screen. "You're all witnessing the original testament of Edward Cole." Gregory Hales, pale as paper, tried to shut off the projection, fumbling with the control box, but Thomas Gray had already anticipated it. He stepped aside, allowing the final video file to play. My grandfather appeared again, older, frailer, but his eyes alive with something sharper than age. "If they laugh when you stay silent," he said, looking directly into the lens, "let your silence frighten them." The words hung there. I could feel every pair of eyes turned toward me, waiting for me to gloat, to break, to react. But I didn't. I just stood still, the calm center of their chaos. My father's face reddened. "Go ahead, Ethan. Sign it. Prove you don't need this family's money. You always wanted to be on your own, so be it." His voice cracked, the kind of anger that comes from fear. I looked at him, at the pen gleaming on the table, at the legacy of cruelty disguised as confidence. Slowly, I reached for it. The ballroom watched me lower the tip of the pen to the paper, my name beginning to form in ink. And then I stopped halfway through the first letter. The room exhaled all at once. The silence that followed was alive, waiting for something bigger than my voice. I laid the pen down carefully and lifted my eyes to meet my father's. "You're right," I said softly. "I don't need the money, but I won't give up what's mine to prove it." And somewhere above us, the chandeliers began to tremble again. The tension in the ballroom was so thick it felt physical pressing against my lungs. Thomas Gray raised his hand for quiet. "There's another part of Clause 9, he said. A subsection called the humility provision." His voice carried deliberate, every syllable slicing clean. "It states, if any heir is coerced into signing away their inheritance in public view, the coercing parties forfeit their rights immediately. All assets will be frozen and temporarily reassigned to the coerced heir until review." The words landed like stones. I heard someone gasp. My father barked, "That's absurd. You can't prove coercion." Thomas Gray pointed calmly to the table. The microphone, the Parker Duofold pen, the projection feed. "Every device in this room has been recording since you invited your guests. You wanted an audience. Now you have one." Gregory Hales stammered. He wasn't forced. He's holding the pen of his own free will. Before Thomas could respond, Judge Elaine Porter stepped forward, her expression carved in stone. "I've just reviewed the live footage. The verbal and emotional pressure exerted here qualifies as coercion under Illinois Civil Code. This clause is enforceable immediately." My mother sank into her chair, whispering my father's name. He ignored her, fumbling for his phone, dialing the bank as if he could talk his way out of a legal trigger. Thomas Gray read from the will again. "Upon confirmation of coercion, the Emergency Trust Fund, $12 million, will activate and transfer to Ethan Cole under judicial protection." Gregory Hale's phone buzzed. He looked down, face draining of color. "It's already happened," he said weakly. "Cole Enterprises accounts frozen. Emergency fund initiated." My sister's voice cut through, panicked. "That can't be the San Francisco penthouse. It's mine." Thomas Gray didn't even look at her. "It was never legally transferred. The funds used to purchase it originated from the estate. You've been living in a property that was never yours." My father slammed his phone against the table, but before he could shout, the room erupted again. The screen lit up with an automated message: "Emergency Trust activated. Transfer completed." Somewhere near the stage, the photographer raised his camera, the same man who'd promised me he'd film everything. The lens light blinked red, still recording. My grandfather's plan was foolproof, designed for this exact moment. My father lunged toward the microphone. "You've humiliated this family enough," he roared. Thomas Gray didn't flinch. "No, Richard. Edward Cole gave you decades to prove you understood humility. You failed the test." Then he turned to me, his voice softening. "Ethan, you have the floor." For the first time that night, I stepped forward without fear. The light hit me squarely, bright and cold. I looked out over the crowd, reporters, scribbling guests, whispering, my family collapsing under the weight of their own pride. "I used to think silence meant weakness," I said. "But silence can also be a kind of strength, the kind that lets truth speak for itself." No one moved. Then the first pair of hands began to clap. Another followed. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, the applause building until it filled every corner of the room. My parents stayed seated, heads bowed. Lydia's mascara streaked down her cheeks as she looked at me, not with hatred this time, but something closer to understanding. Judge Elaine Porter took the microphone once more. "Effective immediately, the control and trusteeship of Cole Enterprises will pass to Ethan Cole, lawful heir and executive of Edward Cole's legacy." The words echoed like thunder. I felt my chest tighten, not from triumph, but from something deeper, a quiet grief that always follows when truth finally wins. As the applause faded, I stepped down from the stage. Reporters surged forward, flashing cameras and questions. I barely heard them. My grandfather's voice from that final recording played again in my mind. If you can keep your kindness when they fall, that's when you truly win. I looked toward Lydia, huddled near the edge of the stage, tears cutting through her makeup. For the first time, I didn't see a rival or a stranger, just someone who'd been shaped by the same house that once broke me. I turned away from the lights, the noise, the victory. The fight for my name was over, but the work of making it mean something real had only just begun. Morning poured through the glass walls on the 72nd floor, turning the river into a blade of light. Newspapers lay across the conference table like verdicts. Cole Enterprises turned the empire inside out. I stood at the head of the room with Thomas Gray on my right, Judge Elaine Porter on my left, and my family opposite me. Lydia in her chair, my mother, Margaret, gripping a handkerchief, my father, Richard, studying me like a hostile market. Gregory Hales hovered near the window, gray and shrunken. Thomas Gray spoke first, clean and clinical. The court recognizes Ethan Cole as the lawful heir and interim trustee. An order has been entered freezing Richard and Margaret Cole's personal assets for 60 days while the court reviews irregularities. He slid a copy of the order down the table. The paper stopped at my father's fingertips. He didn't touch it. He began falling back on the nickname he used when he wanted me pliable. You don't understand how complex this is. A portfolio like ours needs seasoned hands. I've spent decades shepherding these holdings. Exactly, I said. And I'm done letting those holdings shepherd us. I looked from him to the river. This company is going to become what Granddad wanted it to be. Not a monument, a conduit. I set a folder on the table. Effective immediately, I'm converting Cole Enterprises into the Cole Foundation for Creative Healing. The buildings, the cash, the properties, they'll serve programs, not egos. My mother's breath caught. You will destroy our name. No, I said. I'm giving it back its meaning. Lydia finally looked up. Behind the smudged mascara and the fatigue, there was something I had never seen in her before, fear that wasn't about losing status. Fear of losing a chance to be different. If you turn it all into a foundation, she said, voice barely there. What happens to me? Thomas Gray answered before I could. Your grandfather anticipated that question. He produced a single-page addendum and slid it toward me. I read it once, then again out loud. Any beneficiary who loses their claim under the humility provision may restore their portion by completing 30 months of independently verified public service. I looked at my sister. It's not punishment. It's a way back. She stared at the paper, then at me. Where would I start? In the only place that ever saved me, I said. Portland. In a classroom with kids who don't care where you went to school as long as you show up for them. My father leaned forward, bargaining on instinct. Split it 50-50. Keep the foundation on your side if you must, but don't torch the assets that built this family. Thomas Gray took a letter from an envelope stamped with my grandfather's seal. He read it gently, almost like a prayer. If they ask to divide, let them divide responsibility. He folded the letter and set it down. I turned back to my parents. I'm establishing a restricted fund called Family Renewal. You'll receive a modest stipend for living expenses on the condition that you attend weekly family therapy and volunteer hours at the foundation. If you miss the service, the stipend stops. If you complete it, your names return to the masthead not as owners, as mentors. My mother brought the handkerchief to her mouth. My father stared at me, then at the judge, then out at the river where a barge pushed against the current. And if we refuse? He asked. Then the court order stands, and the foundation proceeds without you. No one spoke for a long time. In the silence, the building's HVAC sighed, and the city kept moving below us, indifferent to our private war. Finally, Lydia reached for the addendum with both hands. "He'll do it," she said. I want to start where he started. My father closed his eyes, something in his shoulders softened. Not surrender, not yet, but the beginning of it. My mother. Margaret nodded, tears slipping over her knuckles. I slid the conversion documents across the table. Then we're done here. I signed first. Thomas Gray countersigned. Judge Elaine Porter added her notation. Camera shutters clicked from the doorway where reporters had been allowed to witness the filing. The new letterhead reflected off the lacquered wood like fresh water Cole Foundation for Creative Healing. When the pens were capped, Thomas Gray leaned to me and spoke low. "You just did what Edward ran out of time to finish." I went to the window. The river bright as solder traffic glinting along Embarcadero Street. For the first time since I was a kid, the city didn't look like a wall. It looked like a direction. 6 months later, summer had the city smelling like warm brick and cut grass. The new campus sat on a corner that used to mean nothing to anyone. Now kids sprinted toward its glass doors as if joy were clocked in here like a shift. A banner above the entry read, "We measure success in lives changed." I still taught mornings at 47. Afternoons I walked these halls listening for the sound I'd chased my whole life. Proof that purpose could be louder than money. Lydia arrived early every day, hair tied back, tote bag dented with markers, and tape bus pass tucked behind her ID. She rented a studio the size of a good closet and learned the cafeteria staff's names before the boards, $46,000 a year. And she could tell you which kid needed a weighted blanket and which needed 5 quiet minutes beside the aquarium. The first time I watched her lead, she crouched on the floor with a boy who refused to make eye contact. Not pushing, just waiting. When he slid a purple stroke across the paper, she didn't cheer. She mirrored it. He added white. She followed a conversation without words. I stepped in one afternoon and found her hair-streaked violet shoes off socks, patterned with tiny hammers of paint. A boy with cotton balls glued to his sneakers marched in a slow circle. "Clouds help me walk soft," he announced. Then he looked at Lydia and said, "Careful and proud. Purple sounds happy." She laughed and cried at once, the kind of sound that heals what applause never touches. That sentence started everything I told her. "Then let it end here," she said, "where it belongs." My parents showed up late that day in volunteer shirts, the sleeves rolled twice to hide their nervousness. My father read a picture book like he was learning rhythm for the first time. My mother mixed paint with a girl who communicated in color blocks. When a tiny hand stamped a green print across her blouse, she touched it as if it were metal. "I'm not washing this," she said. And for once it wasn't performance. It was a vow. At the ribbon cutting, Thomas Gray and Judge Elaine Porter stood near the back, smiling like conspirators of mercy. Thomas Gray handed me a small envelope worn soft by years. Inside was my grandfather's handwriting. "When you teach them how to measure, you teach the world what matters." We didn't clap. We handed the scissors to a child who loved the snap of the blades and let him do the honors. We opened the gallery after. 23 canvases by children who once used silence as armor, each a color of sound. Low blue, like morning's a yellow laugh that wouldn't sit still, a red path that turned back before the edge. Lydia lifted the last piece onto the final bracket harmony. A field of lavender washed with white. He'd ask why not more white, I said. "So the purple could breathe," she answered. A letter came from Gregory Hales, the apology clean, the affidavit attached. The investigation closed with service and supervision instead of spectacle. My parents now logged hours without being watched. Some debts are paid with hands, not checks. Late one night, a former student emailed I nominated the foundation for an impact award. "Thought you'd care. You taught me to stay." I closed the laptop and finished washing brushes. Awards help donors. What kept me upright was that line. We mounted a small plaque in the foyer, "Legacy is Impact." In a glass case nearby, the Parker Duofold pen rested on velvet beside a card, "Don't sign what costs you yourself." Along the hallway, framed facsimiles of 23 returned envelopes finally belonged to the place they were always headed. Tell us in the comments, or just write what this story made you feel. If you liked it, please hit like and subscribe. It seriously helps us keep telling stories like this. YouTube chose this for you. Tap it and see if they were right.